Sex and Sorcery, the Obsidian Rose Prophecy. Chapter 1. The Ink and the Ether. The ink on my parchment never stays black for long. When I write of desire, it turns the color of a bruised plum. When I write of betrayal, it shimmers like cold, sharp steel. I am Serena vain, and in the city of Eldoria, words are not merely vessels for thought, they are conduits for the soul. Outside my window, the spires of the High Mage's district pierce the violet twilight, glowing with the soft, pulsating hum of the ley lines. Eldoria was a city built on the bones of ancient gods and the whims of modern sorcerers. Here, love wasn't just a feeling, it was a regulated commodity. The Guild of Affection drafted contracts for lifelong unions, ensuring that magical bloodlines remained pure, while the Alchemists Union sold bottled infatuation to those too timid to seek the real thing. I dipped my quill into a well of shimmering essence and began to write. We are told that destiny is a thread spun by the fates, but in Eldoria we know better. Destiny is a knot we tie ourselves, usually while blinded by the scent of jasmine and the heat of a stranger's skin. I sighed, the scent of rain and ozone drifting through the casement. My own heart was a library of stories I had lived and lost, a collection of forbidden tales that the guilds would burn if they ever found my private journals. I reached for my cloak, a silk-spun thing of midnight blue, and prepared to meet the only 3 people in this gilded cage of a city who knew the woman behind the writer. The Moon Ember tavern sat in the shadow of the great library, its sign swinging in a wind that tasted of upcoming storms. It was a place where the light was always amber, and the secrets were always shared. As I pushed open the heavy oak doors, the familiar chime of the protective wards rippled over my skin. In a corner booth, bathed in the glow of a floating candle that never burned down, they were waiting. Mira was already halfway through a glass of chilled elvish wine, her red hair pinned back with silver needles that could double as daggers. Beside her, Kalla was swirling a vial of something iridescent into her ale, her eyes, the color of amber and gold, tracking the way the liquid separated and danced. And across from them, Biana was sharpening a small, wicked-looking blade, her fingers sparking with the faint, rhythmic crackle of a coming tempest. "You're late, Serena," Mira said, not looking up from a scroll covered in the dense, suffocating legalese of a soul bond contract. "I was beginning to think you'd finally been abducted by one of those tragic princes you're so fond of dramatizing." "A writer is never late, Mira," I countered, sliding into the velvet bench beside Kalla. "She is merely gathering a more dramatic entrance." "And what did you gather today?" Kalla asked, her voice like honey and smoke. She leaned in, the scent of crushed lilies and sulfur clinging to her. "Any new research into the chemistry of the heart?" "I'm working on a pheromone blocker for the Duchess's daughter. She's fallen for a stable boy with no magical aptitude, and her father wants her cured by the solstice." "Love isn't a disease to be cured, Kalla," Biana grunted, her voice low and raspy. "It's an infection. You just have to wait for the fever to break or die in the process." I looked at my friends, the lawyer, the scientist, the warrior. We were the anomalies of Eldoria, women who refused to have our magic or our hearts legislated. "Tonight isn't about the Duchess," I said, catching the eye of the tavern keeper. "Tonight is about us. And the fact that the moon is waxing in the house of the raven. Change is in the air." "Change is just another word for a breach of contract," Mira muttered, but she finally rolled up her scroll. Little did we know, the change had already arrived. It was standing in the doorway, drenched in the silver rain of the city. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Rain. The atmosphere in the Moon and Ember shifted before he even spoke. It was a physical weight, a sudden drop in pressure that made the candles flicker and die, leaving us in a dim sapphire gloom. He didn't walk so much as move through the space, a predator navigating a familiar forest. He wore charred leather armor, etched with runes that didn't belong to any Eldorian guild. Over his shoulder was a silver-hilted blade, and strapped to his thigh was a series of glass cylinders containing dark, swirling vapors. He was a riftwalker, a mercenary of the wild lands, a man who hunted the monsters that the city's walls were built to keep out. He stopped at the bar, but his eyes the color of a winter sky just before the first snow, swept the room until they landed on our table. Specifically, they landed on me. "That," Biana whispered, her hand moving instinctively to the hilt of her broadsword, "is a problem." "That," Kalla corrected, her pupils dilating as she analyzed his scent, is a masterpiece of biological engineering. Do you see the way his pulse beats in his neck? It's slower than a human's. He's been modified. He's a walking lawsuit, Mira added, though her grip on her wine glass tightened. Riftwalkers aren't allowed within city limits without a sanctioned hunt warrant. If the watch finds him, anyone seen with him will be charged with harboring a rogue agent. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I was too busy capturing the way the shadows clung to the bridge of his nose, the way his jaw was set in a line of weary defiance. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who had seen the end of the world and survived it, only to find he didn't like what was left. He approached our table. The air around him tasted of salt and ancient stone. "Which one of you is the weaver of tales?" he asked. His voice was a low vibration, the kind that moves through the floorboards and settles in your bones. I cleared my throat, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I am Serena Vane, and these are my associates. We aren't in the habit of giving audiences to strangers, especially those who carry the scent of the gray wastes." The man pulled a heavy, iron-bound coin from his pouch and set it on the table. It wasn't gold or silver. It was obsidian, etched with a rose that seemed to bleed light. "The prophecy of the Obsidian Rose," Mira gasped, her legal mind jumping to a dozen ancient statutes. "That's a myth. A bedtime story told to scare children into obeying the guilds." "It's not a myth," the stranger said, his gaze locked onto mine. "My name is Valerius, and I've come from the edge of the world to tell you that the rose has begun to bloom. If you want to save this city, and the people you love, you're going to have to stop writing stories and start living one." Biana stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the stone floor. "We don't take orders from mercenaries, Valerius. Why should we believe a word you say?" Valerius looked at Biana, and for a moment, his cold exterior cracked. There was a profound sadness there. "Because, Stormcaller, the first petal has already fallen. Check the fountains in the Plaza of Spells. They aren't running with water anymore. They're running with blood." Chapter 3. The Logic of the Heart. Mira Doran prided herself on being the most sensible woman in Eldoria. While I spent my days dreaming of moonlight trysts and Kalla spent hers boiling dragon scales, Mira was the one who kept us grounded. She knew every loophole in the Great Charter. She knew exactly how to dismantle a man's ego with a single well-placed subordinate clause. But as we stood in the Plaza of Spells an hour later, even Mira was silenced. The great fountain, a marvel of levitating marble and endless crystal water, was silent. In its place, a thick, viscous crimson liquid pooled in the basin. It didn't smell like blood. It smelled like crushed peonies and old parchment. It was magical blood, the lifeblood of the city's ley lines. "This is an environmental catastrophe," Mira whispered, though her hands were shaking as she reached out to touch the stone. "The wards. The entire infrastructure of Eldoria depends on the purity of this flow. If the ley lines are corrupted, the spells that hold the buildings up, the heat in our homes, the very shields that protect us from the Shadowkin, it will all fail." Valerius stood behind us, a dark sentinel in the moonlight. "It's the corruption of the rose. Someone in this city is trying to rewrite the fundamental laws of magic. They're trying to create a love bind that can control not just one person, but the entire population." "A mass-scale love bind?" Kalla asked, her scientific curiosity warring with her horror. "The energy required for that would be astronomical. You'd need a catalyst, a heart that has never been broken, or a soul that has been shattered completely." I looked at my friends. We were all silent, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Eldoria was a city of luxury, of art, of sophisticated romance. But beneath the surface it was a machine, and someone was throwing a wrench into the gears. "I need to get to the archives," Mira said suddenly, her eyes flashing with a familiar, sharp intelligence. "If there's a legal precedent for this, or a hidden record of the rose's origin, I'll find it. Serena, I need your help with the ancient texts. Your knowledge of forbidden lore is better than any scholar's." "I'm going to the Alchemists Quarter," Kalla declared. "I need to see if anyone has been buying up the ingredients for a grand catalyst. If there's a scent to this magic, I'll track it." "And I," Biana said, drawing her sword with a metallic ring that echoed through the empty plaza, "will keep an eye on our new friend." I don't trust anyone who brings bad news with such impeccable timing. Valerius offered a ghost of a smirk. Fair enough, warrior. But keep your sword sharp. The things that follow the rose aren't easily killed by steel alone. Chapter 4. The Archivist's Secret. The great library of Eldoria was a labyrinth of vertical shelves, where books flew on enchanted wings and the air was thick with the dust of 1,000 years. Mira and I moved through the stacks like ghosts. "You're unusually quiet," Mira said, her fingers dancing over the spines of various leather-bound tomes. "Usually you'd be narrating this in your head, talking about the sepulchral silence or the weight of forgotten dreams." I smiled weakly. "I'm thinking about Valerius. There was something in his eyes, Mira. Not just darkness. A recognition." Mira stopped and looked at me, her expression softening. "Serena, he's a riftwalker. They're trained to look at everyone like they're a potential target or a potential casualty. Don't go weaving a romance out of thin air, just because he has a nice jawline." "It's not that," I insisted. "He knew my name. He knew who we were. A mercenary from the wildlands shouldn't know about a group of women who meet in a tavern to complain about their love lives." Mira sighed, pulling a massive black-bound volume from a hidden shelf. "In this city, Serena, everyone has a secret. Even us. Especially us." She opened the book. It wasn't written in any language I recognized. The letters seemed to crawl across the page like spiders. But as I looked closer, my magic, the magic of the weaver, began to translate the intent behind the ink. "It's a diary," I whispered. "The diary of the first archmage. He didn't build Eldoria to be a paradise. He built it to be a tomb for a goddess of passion who had gone mad. He used the Obsidian Rose to lock her heart away, using the ley lines as her chains." Mira's face went pale. "The love contracts, the affection guilds, they aren't for the citizens. They're rituals. Every time a contract is signed, every time magic is used to regulate emotion, it strengthens the chains. And now the chains are breaking," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "The blood in the fountain, she's waking up. And she's hungry." Suddenly, the library shuddered. A low, rhythmic thumping began to echo through the floorboards, the sound of a giant heart beating deep beneath the earth. "We have to get to the others," Mira shouted over the rising din. But as we turned to leave, the shadows between the bookshelves began to thicken. They coalesced into shapes, men in obsidian masks, wielding staves that pulsed with a sickly, necrotic green light. "The Guild of Shadows," Mira spat, her hands beginning to glow with the golden light of the law. I should have known. They don't want to save the city. They want to control the goddess. "Stay behind me, Serena," Mira commanded. She stepped forward, her voice ringing out with the authority of the High Court. "By the power of the Great Charter and the laws of Eldoria, I declare this space a sanctuary. Cease your magic or be struck by the weight of justice." A beam of pure, blinding light erupted from her palms, slamming into the first of the masked mages. But they didn't fall. They absorbed the light, their masks glowing brighter. "Logic won't work here, Mira," I cried. I reached into my cloak and pulled out a handful of silver dust, ink powder infused with the essence of the unrequited. I threw it into the air and spoke a word of power. "Let the weight of longing blind you. Let the memories of what you have lost drown you." The dust exploded into a mist of shimmering violet. The masked mages stumbled, their movements becoming sluggish and erratic. They weren't being hit by physical force. They were being hit by the emotional echoes of every person who had ever walked the library's halls. "Run!" I grabbed Mira's hand and we sprinted toward the exit, the heart of the goddess beating louder and louder beneath our feet. Chapter 5. The Alchemist's Fire. While Mira and I were fighting for our lives in the library, Kalla was in the Alchemists' Quarter, a place of bubbling cauldrons and neon-colored smokes. She was in her element here, navigating the narrow alleys where the air was thick with the smell of cinnamon and rot. She found herself in front of a shop called The Heart's Desire. It was a small, unassuming place, but Kalla knew the owner, a man named Silas who was rumored to be the best fixer in the city. "Silas," Kalla said, pushing open the creaking door, "I need to talk to you about your recent shipments of obsidian dust." The man behind the counter was old, his skin like parchment and his eyes milky with cataracts. He didn't look up from the vial he was filling. "Obsidian is a restricted substance, Kalla. You know that. I haven't seen a grain of it in years. Don't lie to me, Kalla said, leaning over the counter. She picked up a small glass jar and sniffed it. This is concentrated sorrow. You only use this as a binder for obsidian-based rituals. Who bought it, Silas? Who is trying to wake the goddess of passion? Silas finally looked up. A look of genuine fear crossed his face. You don't want to know, girl. Some things are better left buried. The city is bleeding, Silas. Kalla hissed. The fountains are full of ichor. If you don't tell me, I'll tell the Guild of Alchemists that you've been skimming from the royal stores. Silas trembled. It was the High Inquisitor himself. He said he needed it to perfect the love contracts. He said he was going to bring order to the chaos of the heart. Kalla's heart went cold. The High Inquisitor was the most powerful man in Eldoria, second only to the king. If he was behind this, then the law wasn't coming to save them. The law was the one doing the killing. Before she could react, the back door of the shop burst open. Two massive constructs, creatures made of brass and steam, powered by glowing red gems, lumbered into the room. Silas, you talk too much, a cold, cultured voice said from the shadows. Kalla didn't wait. She grabbed two vials from her belt and smashed them on the floor. Transmutation. Aerocombustion. The reaction was instantaneous. The air in the shop turned into a searing wall of blue flame. The constructs slowed, their brass skins melting, but they kept coming. Kalla backed away, her mind racing. She needed something stronger. She reached for the vial she had been working on in the tavern, the one she had been swirling into her ale. It was an experimental compound she called the catalyst of true sight. She threw it not at the constructs, but at the ceiling. The glass shattered and a fine iridescent mist rained down. As it touched the constructs, the illusion that powered them began to flicker. They weren't brass and steam. They were made of human bone and shadow matter. Monstrosities, Kalla whispered. She turned to flee, but a hand caught her by the throat. It was cold like ice and the grip was unbreakable. You have a very inquisitive mind, Mistress Wren, the High Inquisitor said, stepping out of the shadows. He was a tall, elegant man with silver hair and eyes that were completely black. It's a pity I have to extinguish it. But then, a bolt of blue lightning tore through the roof of the shop, striking the Inquisitor's arm. He roared in pain, releasing Kalla. Biana's storm dropped through the hole in the ceiling, her hair whipping around her face, her eyes glowing with the raw power of a hurricane. Beside her stood Valerius, his silver sword drawn and glowing with a pale, ethereal light. Step away from the alchemist, Biana snarled, her voice crackling with thunder. Or I'll show you what a real storm looks like. Chapter 6. The Storm and the Sword. The battle in the Alchemists' Quarter was a blur of light and violence. Biana was a dervish of destruction, her movements fluid and unpredictable. She didn't just fight. She conducted the energy around her, turning the air itself into a weapon. Valerius moved with a different kind of grace. He was surgical, his sword finding the weak points in the shadow constructs with terrifying precision. He didn't waste energy on grand gestures. He was a man who lived and died by his efficiency. Kalla, get out of here, Biana yelled, parrying a strike from a shadow blade. Go find Serena and Mira. We'll hold them off. Kalla didn't hesitate. She scrambled out of the ruined shop and sprinted toward the great library, her lungs burning. Back in the shop, the High Inquisitor laughed. It was a hollow, echoing sound. You think you can stop the inevitable? The rose is blooming. The goddess is rising. And Eldoria will finally know the peace of total submission. He raised his hands and the shadows in the room began to swirl, forming a massive, multi-limbed beast that towered over Biana and Valerius. I've fought bigger, Valerius said, his voice calm. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small lead-lined flask. He downed it in a single gulp. Immediately, his veins turned black, and his eyes glowed with a terrifying subterranean light. He let out a roar that wasn't human and charged the shadow beast. Biana watched him, a mix of horror and admiration in her chest. She had always been told that her magic was a curse, that she was too volatile, too dangerous. But seeing Valerius embrace his own darkness gave her a sudden, sharp clarity. If I'm a storm, she whispered to herself, then I might as well be a hurricane. She raised her sword to the sky, And for the first time in her life, she didn't try to control the power. She let it take her. The clouds above Eldoria converged, a massive vortex of black and purple. Lightning, thick as tree trunks, began to rain down on the city, striking the shadow beast over and over again. The High Inquisitor screamed as his creation was obliterated. He tried to flee, but Biana was already there, her hand crackling with white-hot energy. She grabbed him by the front of his robes. "The goddess," she demanded. "Where is she being held?" The Inquisitor smiled, blood staining his teeth. "In the place where all love begins and ends. The heart of the palace. But you're too late. The ritual is already complete." He disintegrated into a cloud of black ash, leaving Biana standing in the wreckage of the shop, the rain drenching her to the bone. Valerius approached her, his eyes slowly returning to their normal icy blue. He looked exhausted, his breathing heavy. "He was right about one thing," Valerius said. "We're running out of time." "Then let's go to the palace," Biana said, her voice hard. "I've always wanted to crash a royal party." Chapter 7. The Heart of the Palace. We met at the gates of the royal palace, 4 women and a stranger, a ragtag group of rebels standing against the weight of 1,000 years of tradition. The palace was a monstrosity of gold and white marble, but tonight it looked like a tomb. A faint red glow emanated from the central spire, and the air around it vibrated with a low, mournful hum. "The goddess is in the throne room," Valerius said. "The king is likely being used as the primary anchor. If we break the anchor, we break the spell." "But the king isn't innocent," Mira said, her legalistic heart still beating in her chest. "There must be another way." "Innocence is a luxury we can't afford right now, Mira," Biana said. We moved through the palace corridors, the silence more unsettling than any scream. The guards were slumped against the walls, their eyes open and glazed, caught in a dream of perfect, soul-shattering love. When we reached the great doors of the throne room, I felt a wave of nausea. The magic here was so thick it was like walking through honey. "Wait," I said, putting a hand on the door. "I can feel her. She's not a monster. She's just lonely." "Serena, don't," Kalla warned. "That's her power. She'll use your empathy against you." "No," I insisted. "Listen." I closed my eyes and reached out with my weaver magic. I didn't see a goddess. I saw a woman who had been loved too much and then forgotten. I saw a heart that had been turned into a battery for a city's greed. "She doesn't want to destroy the city," I whispered. "She just wants to be seen." We pushed open the doors. The throne room was transformed. Huge Obsidian Rose vines climbed the walls, their thorns dripping with the same crimson liquid from the fountain. In the center of the room, the king sat on his throne, his face twisted in a mask of ecstatic agony. Standing over him was a figure made of pure, shimmering light, the goddess of passion. She was beautiful and terrifying, her hair a river of sunset gold, her eyes 2 burning stars. "Who dares enter the sanctuary of the heart?" Her voice was a choir of 1,000 whispers. Valerius stepped forward, his sword lowered. "We aren't here to fight you, my lady. We're here to release you." The goddess laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Release? I have been released. I have tasted the blood of this city, and it is sweet with the taste of 1,000,000,000 broken promises. I will turn Eldoria into a monument to the love it has tried to regulate." "But that's not love." I stepped out from behind the others, my voice trembling but clear. "Love isn't a monument, and it's not a contract. It's a choice. It's the messy, painful, beautiful choice we make every single day." The goddess turned her burning gaze on me. "You the weaver. You write of love as if you know it, but you are just as afraid as the rest of them. You hide behind your words because you're terrified of the silence." It felt like a dagger to the heart because it was true. I had spent my life narrating other people's passions because I was too scared to fully commit to my own. "I am afraid," I admitted, tears pricking my eyes. "But I'm here. And my friends are here. We aren't here because of a prophecy or a spell. We're here because we love each other. And that love is stronger than any chain you can forge." Mira, Kalla, and Biana stepped up beside me, their hands finding mine. We formed a circle, our magics intertwining. The light of law, the fire of alchemy, the power of the storm, and the ink of the weaver. "We offer you a different choice," Mira said. "Not a throne, not a tomb, but a place in our hearts. To be remembered, not feared. The goddess wavered, her form flickering. The obsidian vines began to wither. The obsidian rose, Kalla said, holding out a small vial she had prepared. It's not a curse. It's a seed. It just needs the right soil to grow. She poured the liquid, a shimmering silver essence, onto the floor. As it touched the obsidian, the black stone began to transform. It turned white, then soft pink, and finally, it began to bloom into a real living rose. The goddess reached out and touched the rose. A look of profound peace crossed her face. A choice, she whispered. I choose. With a blinding flash of light, the goddess dissolved. But she didn't disappear. She became 1,000 golden petals that drifted through the room, landing on the king, the guards, and finally on us. The weight in the air lifted. The red glow faded, replaced by the soft, natural light of the moon. Chapter 8. The Aftermath of the Heart. Eldoria didn't change overnight. The guilds were still there, and the law was still complicated. But something fundamental had shifted. The fountains were running with clear water again, but it tasted slightly of jasmine. The love contracts were still being signed, but people were starting to read the fine print, and sometimes they were tearing them up. We were back at the Moon Ember. The amber light and the smell of roasting meat a welcome comfort. So, Kalla said, taking a sip of a non-magical ale, the king has declared a week of mourning for the unfortunate magical surge. And the High Inquisitor has been declared a traitor to the crown. Convenient. The law always finds a way to tidy up after itself, Mira said, though she looked more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. She had even unpinned her hair. But the archive has been opened to the public. People are starting to learn the truth about the city's origins. It's a start. Biana was leaning against the bar, her gaze fixed on the door. He left, didn't he? I nodded. Valerius had disappeared as soon as the light faded. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a lingering scent of salt and ancient stone. Riftwalkers don't stay in cities, Biana, I said softly. They belong to the wild. He liked you, Serena, Biana said, turning to look at me. I saw the way he looked at you when you were talking to the goddess. He looked at you like you were the only thing in the room that made sense. I felt a pang of bittersweet longing. Maybe, but some stories aren't meant for a happy ending. They're meant for a beautiful middle. To the beautiful middle, Kalla said, raising her glass. To the beautiful middle, we all echoed. As the night wore on, I pulled out my parchment and my quill. The ink was a soft, glowing rose gold. I began to write, the words flowing onto the page like a prayer. Epilogue. The Weaver's Reflection. We spend our lives looking for a love that will save us, a magic that will fix everything that is broken within our souls. We look to the stars, to the ancient prophecies, to the ink on a page, hoping to find a map to the heart's destination. But the truth I've learned, among the shadows of Eldoria and the whispers of a forgotten goddess, is that love isn't a destination. It's the journey itself. It's the way we stand by our friends when the sky is falling. It's the way we choose to be vulnerable, even when we know it might hurt. It's the way we look at a stranger and see a mirror of our own longing. The Obsidian Rose has bloomed, and with it, the chains of our city have begun to fray. We aren't free yet, not completely. We still have the guilds, the laws, and the expectations of a world that wants us to be quiet and predictable. But we are no longer afraid of the storm. We are the storm. And to the man who carries the scent of the gray wastes, I don't know where your path leads, or if our stories will ever intertwine again. But I will keep writing. I will write the truth of our magic, the heat of our passions, and the strength of our choices. And maybe one day the wind will carry these words to you, and you'll know that in a city of stone and secrets, you were the only thing that felt real. Until then, I will keep my ink wet and my heart open. For in the end, the only sorcery that truly matters is the one we create ourselves. Serena Vane.